Thanks everyone for joining us today. Welcome to our bi-weekly counseling session. This is the first week of June. We thought there is no better time to get started with the college essay. So we're very fortunate to have Daniel joining us as our honor guest speaker. I came across Daniel last year, actually, to be precise. I actually became her fan on YouTube. I was doing research on how to write college essays. Her video popped up on the top. As I watched her video more and more, I couldn't help but being very impressed. Not only Danielle has all the knowledge and brilliance, but I was more impressed by her conviction, her willingness to go above and beyond to help the high schoolers. So this is the first week of June. I'm so happy that our high schoolers get to sleep. And not only get to sleep, they also get time to rest and to reflect and to think about how to start writing college essays in order to win the hearts and the minds of the admissions officers, or just in general, how do they polish their writing skills during the summer? So to that end, we have built a great sprint program, and Danielle will be leading this sprint program starting July the 10th, along with a group of Stella students, college students, who also are great essay coaches. So MJ from Emory, Kaden from UC Berkeley, and Clara from UPenn.
I was really inspired to start talking about this because I felt very confused in my own experience, and I wanted to share my thoughts with other students to kind of give them my perspective on what essay writing was like. And then that led to me starting a business where I edited students' essays. And ultimately, I've edited more than 500 students' essays. So my thoughts about essay writing have really evolved over time. And I feel like over the years throughout college working on this essay editing, I've learned a lot that I would like to share with students and that I'm going to share with you today. Okay. So the big question that we ask ourselves is, why are we writing these essays? So the purpose of the college essays, the application is broken into sort of major sections, right? So a lot of the application is going to tell the admissions officers whether or not you are academically prepared to go to their institution. That is usually we refer to that as somebody's stats, right? Their test scores, their SAT scores, whatever extracurricular activities they did. Those all go together to show that a student, whether they're academically prepared or not to go to that institution. So when we think about our essays, it's like a layer separate from that. So we already can prove whether or not we are academically qualified to go to a particular school based on these numbers, how we performed in high school, how we performed on our exams. But the opportunity that we have to differentiate ourselves further comes from the essays. So I've thought a lot about how to characterize what colleges look for when they look for students on a personal level. And I think that, for a long time we heard about, we want students to be well-rounded. Then later we heard about, oh, we don't want students necessarily to be well-rounded, but we want them to be really focused in one area and then have also other areas of interest. I think the best way to summarize that for me is to say that we want students to be dynamic. And so if you think about the difference between a student who is really hardworking, gets really good grades, does some extracurricular activities, and a student who you think is somebody who might change the world, who would have a positive impact on a campus, that student I would characterize as dynamic, somebody who has multiple facets of them as a person, somebody who has shown maturity and development on like multiple different levels, not necessarily how much of a specific interest do they have in anything, but more just like as a person, how convinced are you that this person is able to make a positive contribution to a group that they're in? And I would characterize that person as dynamic and driven. So that's how I've come to that terminology. And what we want to do is, assuming we already have these stats, the academics, to prove that we're academically qualified, we want to use our essays further to show the college admissions officers who we are, and show them that we are these dynamic people. We are going to be a positive contribution to their campus. So our question that we think about when we're writing our essays, and that we'll be discussing today really, is how do we prove to a college, to somebody who is reading our essays, that they should choose us over somebody else who has the same grades, the same test scores, the same leadership experience, somebody who is equally qualified as us. And this is not a theoretical question. This will happen, especially for the most competitive universities. Almost all of the students who are applying are academically qualified. Thousands and thousands of students are at the very, very top tier of test scores and essays, right? So that is a question that we ask ourselves as we're writing our essays, and that's really the goal of our essays. So let's talk about some of the basics before we talk about like writing the essays themselves. These are just the foundational things that I think a lot of us aren't really sure about even when we start writing the essays. But the style of our essays is formal but personable is how I would characterize. So I'll give you a little example of a style that is too formal and a style that is better suited to the college essay. So the first one, the non-example, is that solemn night I was woefully plagued by the misery of the dissolution of my mother and father's nuptial union. At the precipice of emotional turmoil, I attempted to make sense of what uncertainties the future might hold. Wherefore would I be cursed with such a lamentable fate? Versus our example is, that night I couldn't sleep. A feeling of solemnity hung over me as I stared up at my ceiling. A divorce? The word was still crawling around in my ears. My mind was working hard to ration with me. Everything would be okay, she said, but my heart, she was panicked. So contrasting the first and the second one. So both of them use some big words, like the second one used the word solemnity, but this sounds much more, the second one sounds much more like there is a real person that is writing this, that is trying to make a connection with their reader. The first one uses so much embellished academic language that it creates a sense of distance between the reader and the person who is writing it. So all of these words are words that they just come out of my head like I knew these words, but it's just not natural to use them all like that together, right? We're trying to show off that we use big vocabulary in the first example, and it doesn't feel effective. So when we are going for a particular style, we want to focus on something that is more like the second one, something that makes the reader feel closer to the writer rather than more distanced. So we're going to talk about several different types of essays today, but the biggest one is the Common App essay or the personal statement. Okay, so for most schools, it's going to be the Common App essay, but some schools have their own dedicated applications. It'll be more like the personal statement. But the Common App essay is the one we spend the most time preparing for, the most time editing. It's the most important one because not only is it the longest essay of the application, but it is also the one that can be used for multiple schools. So we really want to, it makes sense for us to dedicate more time to this particular essay. And that's the one that I would start writing now. That's the one that in our sprint program we'll probably focus the most on because, like I said, it really is the most important one. But the other essays we call supplemental essays, and every school has different supplemental essays, but there's a lot of overlap. So pretty much every school has a why school essay that says, why do you want to go to this university? A lot of schools have a diversity essay. A lot of schools have an adversity essay, and there are also other supplemental essays that we won't address today, but we will have some more time to look at in our sprint program specifically. So with the Common App essay, I'm going to show you some of the prompts. Okay, we don't have to read all of them. Basically, I just want to point out something about these prompts. So whenever we write an essay, a lot of times we think about, oh, we want to be answering the prompt completely. And I always got a lot of students that submitted essays to me and they say, oh, I don't know if this fits Common App essay prompt 1 or if it fits 3 better, or if I should submit it as 7. So there are 7 different prompts. The 7th one is just share whatever you want if it doesn't fit this prompt. So how I feel about these prompts is whenever a student submits an essay to me and they say something like that, I don't think I ever look at the prompt for a Common App essay that gets submitted to me, because for this particular essay, yes, there are prompts, but they all have the commonality. So if you notice the words like a time that's meaningful, reflect on a time, reflect on something, discuss an accomplishment or an event, discuss a concept you find engaging. All of these are just asking you to reflect on a meaningful experience or concept, which is essentially the same thing as a personal statement. So when you apply to graduate school, then they will just say, oh, write a personal statement. That is difficult, and the colleges understand that is difficult for us as high schoolers to just know what to write in a personal statement. So they give us these prompts to give us some ideas of the type of things that they want us to write about. But I'm highlighting this because I want our writers to understand that this particular essay, the Common App essay, is not about picking a prompt and then completely answering that prompt. The better strategy is to simply read these prompts to give you some ideas, then come up with your topics, and then at the end you can fit it to a prompt, because there's always number 7, which is write about anything. So really these prompts are more of a guideline to give us some ideas of the types of things that we might want to discuss in a personal statement, but they're not our strict starting point. We don't pick a prompt and then respond to that one, or we don't have to do that, right? We can, but we don't have to do that. They're basically all just asking for reflection on something that is meaningful to us. So when we are writing the essay, we have 2 primary goals before we can say that our Common App essay is ready, it's done. We have to make sure that our essay has a positive impact on the reader. That comes from our tone, our style, and also our message, right? So earlier I was talking about how we want a sense of levity, right? We want humility, we want lightheartedness, we want maybe a little bit of humor, not too much, maybe a little bit of humor in our essay, right? Either way, we want it to have leave a positive impression on the person who's reading it. They should feel better, because if they feel a positive feeling after reading our essay, they will associate us and our application with a positive memory. If they feel a negative emotion after reading our essay, how can they do anything other than associate our application with a negative memory? It's simple, like, human reaction. So we have to make sure that our essay is going to have a positive impact on the reader, and we want to make sure that our essay is memorable, because if our essay is not memorable, if it's not something that's different from what other students will be writing, if it's very boring, we've essentially wasted this opportunity that we have, this very limited opportunity, basically our only opportunity to directly communicate with the admissions officers. We have lost that. So before we can say that our essay is ready, we have to make sure that these 2 points have been hit. It makes a positive impact, and that the essay is memorable, or the essay makes us memorable to whoever is reading the essay. So where do we start? I have to be honest that with the Common App essay, it's the hardest one to really coach a student through starting. We really just have to be able to brainstorm a wide variety of topics that fall into those kind of things that we were discussing with the prompts, because this really is a very personal essay. So it is hard for anyone to tell you this is what you need to write. It's difficult because it is less structured than some of those supplemental essays that give us one specific prompt, right? But that's why it's so important that we start early with this one, so that we can explore a wide variety of topics and kind of figure out what feels meaningful to us and what we can write about in a way that is effective. So the number 1 most important thing that we have to remember as we're writing our essay is that the person on the other side is also a human. So I feel like people have this way, or students have this way, of thinking about figures of authority and thinking that the way that they think is different from the way that we think. And so we need to undermine our own logical understanding of what is an interesting, compelling story, and instead employ somebody else's logic that we don't understand to dictate what does this figure of authority want. That doesn't make any sense, because the person, no matter what position they're in, is also a human being. They're going to read your essay in a way, honestly, probably very similar to how you or one of your friends would read your essay. And you have to think about, like, if I read this essay, would that make me happy? Would that make me compelled? Would that make me think, oh, I want to learn more about this person? If you think yes, then likely an admissions, I have an endless list of things that I could suggest that you avoid for this particular essay, but I try to condense 4 of the most important ones, right? So it's not a resume. I heard so many people say, oh, my English teacher told me this, my parent told me that I have to include more about my accomplishments in this essay. Well, you already have space in the application, in your activities form, in one of your extracurricular activity essays. You already have space to discuss what you have accomplished. So we never want to waste any space, any opportunity that we have to convey some message in the application. So we don't want to repeat what we have already said elsewhere. And the essay is not the most effective place to communicate this information. You only have 650 words. You're wasting that space if you're communicating about different types of accomplishments that you had. It's redundant. So somebody gave me the advice that I have to talk more about my achievements in my own essay. And I think one of the best things I did for my own essay is not take that advice. And I did not talk about achievements at all in that essay, which I think was fine because I had already addressed it in my application. So it's not a resume. You don't have to talk about your achievements at all. In fact, I discourage it unless you have a really compelling narrative there, unless it like ties into your narrative that you already have. So this next one is kind of strange. I don't think this is something that you could anticipate if you haven't been in the position of reading many, many essays. And that is that your essay should not require a trigger warning. What I mean by that is many students, when they write this essay, this is the first time that they have had to think very deeply about the course of their life. And so they want to share an experience that's meaningful to them, but they share in very extreme detail about something that was traumatic or something like a very personal experience with mental illness or some other type of challenge, that if this was an article online or a video story online, it would have a warning, a content warning or a trigger warning, something that indicates that if the viewer is not comfortable viewing this topic, that they should not read this article or watch this video, right? So your essay content should not be like that either. The admissions officers, like I said, they're just humans. They also have the right to not be exposed to really graphic content, and they should not, have to read such an essay without warning. And these essays don't have warnings on them, right? So we also, if we are writing a topic like that, we also really run a significant risk of having other problems happen, like the essay does not have a positive tone or the essay does not leave a positive impression. So just be very careful when we write about topics like that. Next, we want to avoid cliches and drama in our essay. A lot of times students love to be dramatic. They think it will add to the essay, but sometimes it just ends up adding a little bit of cringe to it. So my example here is the classic, oh, my life was changed forever. Obviously, this would be an exaggeration, and we don't need to dramatically embellish our essay in order for it to be effective. A lot of times, excessive drama, when somebody tells a story and it's very over exaggerated, we kind of feel a distance from that person because we start to think, I don't know if that's really true. We want to convey authenticity, and cliches and drama kind of take away from that. And then this last one is just my personal pet peeve, which is do not use the word passion, because I promise you, every single one of the more than 500 essays that I've used have used the word passion in them. And what does passion mean? It means like you have an intense interest in something or you really care about something. It's just used so often that it has completely lost meaning to anybody who reads more than 10 essays. It's just used so often, and the concept of passion is much more effectively conveyed through showing rather than telling. So if your essay is all about how you did something and how you're really interested in a particular activity that you were doing, showing the emotions that you experienced, showing what the experience was like of that activity, naturally passion will be evident from that. You do not need to be telling this person, oh, I'm passionate about it. If you feel the need to say you're passionate about something, most likely you've not conveyed that through showing it. So regardless, even if it did make sense to use the word passion, it's so overused that it really just falls flat in an essay. So that's my personal rule. Don't use the word passion. It's a missed opportunity to use a different words, anything else. So before we talk about the supplements, I want to just give some ideas about what makes an essay cliche. Like I said, it really can be difficult to tell if you're just you as one student writing this essay, but for somebody who has read a lot of these essays, these cliches become more and more obvious. So I'll give you a little bit of insight into them. In terms of topics, the most common thing I think that causes an essay to be cliche is this thing where you write what you think the admissions officer wants to hear. I have an example here, and the example is volunteering at the hospital helped me realize I have a passion for medicine. So there's the word passion. But also, we know that a lot of these experiences that high schoolers have sometimes are like curated towards high schoolers. So a lot of hospital volunteering, well, if you're 15, there's only so much that you can do, right? So you can have an interest in medicine, but most likely it's inspired by something more nebulous than an actual real experience that you had. It's just you wanted an interest, right? So it not only does it seem a little bit inauthentic, it also really feels like something that a student has written because they think the perception is that, oh, I volunteered, therefore I got this interest, where admissions officers, they can kind of see through that, right? And also, it's just a very, very common topic to talk about. Medicine in general is very at risk for cliches. So common experiences. I think this one is the hardest one to know if you haven't read a lot of essays. For me, the number one is immigration, which is interesting because I also, my own essay touched on immigration as well. I think the reason why this tends to be such a common topic, because, well, we know that a lot of students who are applying to college are immigrants or students from study abroad. However, the number one question prompt asks about if there's something that feels so important to your identity as a student that it would be like something would be missing from your application if you didn't address it, then you should write the essay about it. Well, I think if you were an immigrant, then a lot of times if you think about, oh, something that would be missing from your identity or some really important part of your identity and experience as a student is the fact that you immigrated to the country, right? Or you learned a new language. That feels like really, really important to me, to my experience as a student. So when I saw that prompt, that really makes me want to write about that story because it feels so important and it feels like something would be missing from my application if I didn't write about it. But picking that as the entire full focus for one essay is probably not the best decision because there are so many other students who write this same story. And most of the time, the story is pretty similar. It's about learning a new language. It's about moving from somewhere far away from home. It's about having different customs than the students that you went to school with. And as an individual who had the experience of an immigrant, a lot of times you might be the only one at your school. I was the only one that I knew, one of the only ones at my school, right? So it felt very important to my experience. However, it would be more effective to mention that either in the diversity essay or an essay that's dedicated to it, or mention it as a component of telling another story, like kind of sneak it in there. So I don't think it's like you need to hide this part of your identity. I just think a dedicated essay on these particular topics might not be the best, most effective way to make yourself stand out. So I would say immigration, divorce, studying abroad, volunteering, clubs, and having academic difficulties and then overcoming them. Those are the topics that are extremely, extremely common and tend to follow sort of a similar narrative. Therefore, are very difficult to write in a way that reveals something unique about you. And then finally, vague realizations. This one is more about like, I'll just read the example. It says, when I realized that life only stops once you give up, I was able to overcome my shyness and win the debate competition. A lot of times students write about some experience that they had, for example, competing in a debate competition, and they had this mental block, and the way they overcame it is by just doing it. This is very cliche because, number one, it doesn't really show much about your growth process if the way that you solved the problem was to just do it. It also has that air of like, really, did you really permanently overcome this problem by one time facing a challenge related to it? It's just not the most effective way to convey something compelling about you by telling a story about like how your life changed because you realized that you could do this one thing. And then in terms of styles, there's a few things that are very cliche in terms of the writing style. I do think that this is one of the things that when we're in school, we learn how to write narrative writing in a very specific way. And they always tell us that we have to start with some action, otherwise the reader will get bored. But the person who's writing this, reading your essay, has to read it. They're going to read the whole thing. They're not going to get bored and pick a different essay if they don't like the first sentence. So one of these things is starting in medias res. That means starting in the middle of the action. So many students write like this, where they're starting and we're already, something is happening, right? So here's the example. This would be the first sentence of such an essay. My cheeks turned red as the cold breeze rushed over me. The crowd's eyes were on me. And so as soon as I read something like this, I'm like, okay, it sounds like that, there's something eventful happening, but I personally, as a reader, I'm a little bit disoriented because I don't know what's happening. And when we have as small as word count as 650 words, we really have to be more straightforward than that, right? We can't just start in the middle of some action. It's very difficult to execute effectively because you can end up disorienting the reader. The way that this style works is you start in the middle of the action, then you have a flashback, then you add more information, and it's too much for 650 words. It's too disorienting. Then having a dramatic hook sentence. My example here is, I never could have guessed that a slice of pie would change the course of my life forever. It's potentially interesting, but again, you don't have to hook or attract the reader. The person is going to read your essay. The admissions committee is going to read your essay. You can start out just characterizing what the essay is going to be about. Just start out straightforward and jump right into whatever the story is. And then overly dramatic in general. Since then, every single thing that I do motivates me to be the absolute best person that I can be in this beautiful world. That's obviously an over-exaggeration of what this might look like, but it just creates that sense of distance between the reader and you. So let's talk about some of the supplements specifically. So the Why School essay, fortunately, is one of the more formulaic essays, but there is one important thing that we do have to do for this essay. So if we're saying, why we want to go to a particular school, we do have to research some of those opportunities that the school has and find ones that interest us that we can talk about authentically. So that means you're going to have to do some research. If you cannot find any opportunities that you can authentically talk about that interest you, then maybe you should question why you're applying to that school. But you should definitely be able to do some research and find some professors that are doing interesting research, some activities that are available at that school, perhaps that connect to things that you're already doing. And you need to be careful, though. The only thing is you need to be careful not to sound presumptive. Presumptive means you kind of are writing as if you're trying to you already have gotten into the school. I don't know why, but so many students do this. I think the reason is because there may be some poor advice out there somewhere saying that it makes you sound confident to speak in this manner, but really you should show humility and make it clear that it would be an honor for you to be admitted to the school, rather than saying, when I'm admitted to the school. Let me give you an example specifically of what this looks like. So the first one, our non-example, is the one that has a presumptive tone. When I go to Stanford, the first thing I'm going to do is join the water polo club. All throughout high school, I played water polo, so Stanford's world-renowned water polo team is the perfect fit for me. The better example is, being on the water polo team at my high school these past couple years has brought me a lot of joy, and it's helped me stay healthy. I would love to continue playing water polo in college, and I'm excited to know that I'd be able to do that if I had the privilege of attending Stanford. So that essay communicates almost the same information, except for the second one even brings into more objective information about why this person is excited about this particular opportunity. But the second one is very humble in the way that it talks about this particular activity. It does not assume that this person is going to get into the school, whereas the first one is speaking as if they know that they're going to get into the school, which, given the low probability, like, these schools are extremely selective, so it just reads as a little bit awkward for a student to write an essay like as if they're sure they're going to get in. The next essay that I want to touch on is the diversity essay. So this essay is almost always optional, and it can be difficult to think about what to write for this essay, or whether we want to write this essay if we feel like we don't fit some traditional idea of diversity. But that's the whole thing, is like, what would be a traditional idea of diversity, right? Diversity has many layers to it. So I recommend writing this essay if you feel like you are able to, because it's really a chance for you to discuss how your identity and the multiple facets of it could enrich the campus community, right? So identity, but also diversity has many levels, from race to ethnicity to gender, culture, and ideas, right? And so if you're writing this essay, then you really want to focus on like all of those levels, or multiple of those levels, right? Because diversity is not just about how a group of people is multifaceted, but how the individual is multifaceted and how that helps them interact with the various groups that they are a part of, right? 60% or more of the essay should be about how it was overcame and what happened next, so we can maintain that positive memory associated with it. And then very last, I will touch on the resume and the activity section. So some schools will ask you for a resume, others will just want you to fill out the activity section of the Common App. But the most important things for us to include here is the measurable impact that we had. So when I was accepted to Duke University, I actually got a full ride there too. And the note that they put in my application of why they accepted me, why I got this scholarship, was because I showed that I made changes in the organizations that I mentioned in this activity section. And I didn't realize it was that impactful. So things like publishing research, changing something in a club you were leading, raising a certain amount of money, organizing a team of students, and how many, those are important details to include. So I have an example here. It says captain of the water polo team. That would be the name of the activity. And then in the description, it says led 12 members and 12 alternates in practice 8 hours a week. Founded the swim team's annual community service project to teach 100 plus kids to swim for free. So that gives the specific numbers and the specific changes that this person did as captain to show really that they were an effective leader. It's not enough to just say that they were a leader, but to say why this wasn't just a position that was sort of like made up or given to them as well. So that's what I have for our essays and things. I will hand it back over to Rebecca. I think she's going to talk a little bit about the spring program.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. I know you were speaking as fast as you can go and try to get as much information out to our audience as possible. But 40 minutes is just not enough. You know, essay is just such a big topic. It's very personal, and it's extremely important in the college application, especially now SAT, ACT becoming optional. Essay's way to just keep good news I wanted to share with you is that starting July the 10th, Daniel, along with other coaches, will be conducting a 5-week, very intense workshops on essay. So this is made for free to our members. Now, I must say, if you go outside to hire a private counselor and just coaching essay and reviewing and editing could easily cost $5,000, if not $25,000 or more. So do take this opportunity and work with Daniel and our other coaches starting July the 10th. And if you wanted to know more information, please go to Kyros website and you will see this is essentially, there's a pop-up window, and this is a perfect time to jumpstart your college essay or just to polish your writing skills in general.